Hello, friends. We are once again being asked to shelter at home as the pandemic spreads and our death toll mounts. We are asked to shelter in place as much as we can in order to reduce the spread of the COVID virus. And as we do, I can't help but think we are continually asked to reimagine what it means to shelter and what it means to create safety for ourselves and for others. I'm thinking about the Irish proverb that says, "It is in the shelter of one another that the people live." I used to think that this meant that we are to offer shelter to one another, that we are to open our doors to those in need, literally and figuratively, and to welcome those in who need physical shelter as well as emotional and social shelter. But in this particular day, we are told to keep our doors closed and to do so in the best interest of everybody that we are keeping outside. And so, what does it mean to live in the shelter of one another when we are asked to isolate in our own homes, when we must keep the doors of our homes and our churches closed for safety, for wellness, for concern and care for one another? I think we are being asked to reimagine what shelter is and how we shelter one another. Some of you might have been at a book launch that we held a few months ago, and it was for a book of poetry and art created by Margaret Hassey and Sharon DeMark, both local artists. And what they did, they created this book in the early stages of the pandemic as they were sheltering at home and trying to retain their sense of connection to other people. And so Margaret would write a poem and send it to Sharon, and Sharon would paint a painting to go with it. And then Sharon would paint a painting and Margaret would write a poem to match it. And each of these pairs of creations in the book explores another aspect of the concept of shelter. It's a beautiful volume and I highly recommend it. But I just offer it today as an example of how we are asked not only to reimagine and newly understand the many ways in which shelter works in our lives and the ways in which we offer it to one another and receive it from one another, but also the way in which we are invited in this time of sheltering at home to reach out across the physical distance in new ways. I have been intrigued to learn that in the Irish saying, "It is in the shelter of one another that the people live," a literal translation of that is we live in one another's shadow. Because the word that means shelter in Irish is the same word, ska, that means shadow and shade. Now, shade we could understand as shelter on a hot sunny day, but the word shadow calls up something different, something more complex. Each of us having that shadow side that Jung talked about. And each of us knowing the shadow side that dwells in our communities and our world. And so, what does it mean to live in one another's shadow as well as one another's shelter? Can we understand shelter in a way that names the dangers of our time without denying our interconnectedness? Some of you may practice the festival of Sukkot in the Jewish tradition, which happened in October of this year. And in that week-long festival and celebration, in remembrance of the Israelites' travel and dwelling in the wilderness, people construct a sukkah, which is a loosely woven hut, described in the teachings as being made of organic matter, woven loosely enough so that one can see the stars through the roof. That is the shelter used in the festival of Sukkot. And the prayer that is spoken during that festival is this. It says to God, spread over us a sukkah of shalom, of peace, of safety. Now, often we think of a shelter of safety as being something solid, a fortress maybe, a wall, something that will protect us from what is on the other side. But this festival and the teachings beneath us teach us to rely on the shelter of relationship, which is also, I think, the teaching of that Irish proverb. To understand that our interconnectedness denies the solid walls we sometimes pretend are saving us from one another. Instead, it honors the need for porous relationship. As we shelter at home, I think it is interesting to note that we are still able to safely see one another across a 6-foot distance and with masks outside, where the air is moving freely, where we can see the stars at night, and where the wind will keep us from infecting one another. We are being asked to trust an open air connection to one another without walls that tell us to lock someone out and hide within. So even as we shelter at home in this day of COVID, I think the deeper question we are being asked to ponder in our spiritual lives and the way we live them out in the world is to ask ourselves, how is the sheltering that I am doing now keeping my heart open to relationship? Relationship to those I know and love and those I don't. How can I live in a sukkah of shalom, of relationship, of vulnerability, because vulnerability may be the only safety we can know today. The vulnerability that calls us into connection without the solid barriers of separating us from them, me from you, one from another. We are interwoven, friends. All of us living in a sukkah of vulnerability. May that vulnerability teach us the practice of open-hearted relationship. Stay steady, stay strong, stay open, friends. That is the shelter we need today.